Welcome to Your Healthy Kitchen from YRMC.
Welcome to Your Healthy Kitchen. I'm your host, Rita Carey Rubin. Today, I'd like to share a healthy, easy way to make risotto, one of my favorite comfort foods. Risotto is a hearty, belly-warming dish that's traditionally made with just a few simple ingredients: short grain arborio rice, chicken, meat, or vegetable stock, some onions, white wine, butter, and Parmesan cheese. It's very delicious, but not terribly nutritious. After all, it's essentially a dish made with lots of white rice and butter. So fortunately, you can turn a basic risotto recipe into something comforting, delicious, warming, and good for you by using a variety of high-fiber whole grains instead of white rice, reducing the butter a bit or substituting olive oil, and adding an extra helping of veggies. And there are an endless number of options for creating your own flavorful risotto. And once you learn the basic risotto cooking method, the sky's the limit. So barley is one of my favorite whole grains to use in risotto, and I'm going to use that today to make a rich and satisfying barley mushroom risotto. Mushrooms and barley, yum, there's a match made in heaven. You know, you can also use other grains instead of barley to make a decent risotto. Farro works well, as do whole oats, steel-cut oats, and short grain brown rice. But out of all of these, I like barley the best for a variety of reasons, including its earthy flavor, its nice chewiness, and relatively short cooking time. But we'll talk about all of that in a minute. Let's get cooking. So risotto, like I said, is really simple. You start with something flavorful and aromatic like an onion, but you can also use shallots and garlic, sautéed in some oil. And I'm going to start this mushroom barley recipe with a shallot. And we've got a pan over here that's been heating up, and put a little bit of olive oil in the pan. And olive oil works really well instead of butter, a little bit of healthier fat. And I use about a tablespoon, which is a lot less than most risotto recipes, which use up to 3 tablespoons of butter, maybe sometimes more. So shallot sauteed in olive oil with just a little pinch of salt. The salt helps break the shallot down and draw its flavor out a little bit. So just let that saute, and I think I'll also put a little bit of fresh ground pepper in there. And let it saute until it starts to get tender. And while it's cooking, I'm going to chop up a little celery. So I like to add extra vegetables to the risotto. Traditional risotto is really mostly rice with just a little bit of addition. Sometimes it's meat or fish, sometimes just a little bit of vegetable on top. But to make this a little healthier, just add some more vegetables, and almost make it more vegetables than grain. So celery just chopped up or diced into small pieces, and you can throw the leaves in there as well. It adds some nice color and some flavor. And toss that in with the shallots. And let them cook down for just a couple minutes so they tenderize just a little bit. And then the next step is to add the mushrooms. So you can use any kind of mushroom for this risotto. You can use some fresh portobellos or shiitakes or chanterelles, any of those a little bit more expensive, fancier mushrooms. Wild mushrooms go well. You can use dried mushrooms and just reconstitute them, soak them in water before you use them, and then chop them up and throw them in the dish. Or you can just use plain old white button mushrooms, that are easy to find and really inexpensive. And to prepare your mushrooms, just wipe them off. Sometimes they come with a little bit of dirt. And just wipe them off. Don't rinse them or soak them in water, because mushrooms will absorb a lot of water. And when you cook them, it'll make the mushrooms, it'll take longer to cook, and they won't brown as well if they soak up too much water. So just give your mushrooms a little wipe here, and chop them up. And small slices is fine. They don't have to be terribly thin. And the trick for this dish, for the mushrooms, is to let them brown in the pan, which will really help develop the flavor. And to do that, what you want to do is take the mushrooms, put them in the pan at a pretty high heat. I think I might increase the heat here a little bit. And stir them around maybe once to coat them in the oil, and then let them sit there for a while. And if they sit, they will brown a little bit faster. We're almost searing the mushrooms on really high heat. I think I'll turn it up just a little bit more. So keep an eye on them because it's a high heat. You don't want them to burn. So while those are cooking, I want to talk a little bit about barley and how incredible it is. It's an incredible grain that's easy to grow in marginal soils. It helps rebuild soils that have been eroded and overused. It's also a great cover crop that reduces weeds as well as pests. And both the leaves and the seeds can be used as food. You can even grow barley grass at home and use it in juice or snipped freshly into a salad. Barley contains more fiber than any other grain, including wheat or brown rice or oats. And it also has less of an impact on blood sugar and insulin levels than all grains, including oats. And barley can even lower blood sugar levels hours after you eat it. In fact, some studies show that people who eat barley with dinner have a better blood sugar level the next day, even after breakfast. So if you have this wonderful mushroom barley risotto for dinner, your blood sugars will be good the next day. The fiber in barley also lowers cholesterol, and it's an important food that supports the growth of healthy bacteria in your gut. The only downside really of barley for some is that it does contain gluten. So anybody with a celiac disease or gluten intolerance should probably avoid eating the grain. The grass, barley grass, is gluten-free, but it boasts a slew of benefits on its own. So you can purchase barley in two different forms. So the most common form is called pearl barley. And it's whole grain barley that's had some of the outer fiber removed. So it cooks a little bit faster. And what's neat about barley is that the fiber is throughout the whole grain. It's not just on the outside of the grain as with most other grains like brown rice or wheat. So when you remove a little bit of the outer grain from the barley, it still maintains most of its nutrients, and it's still a very high fiber grain. So pearl barley is a great type of barley to use in this risotto because it cooks faster than whole grain or what's called hulled barley, which is this. You can say it basically looks the same. The hulled barley just has a little bit more of the outer fiber attached, but takes longer to cook. So you could use the hulled barley, but just know that it'll take a while before it gets soft. So other grains that you can use for your risotto include things like brown rice. So our Barley rice, the traditional grain used for risotto, is a short grain white rice. But you can use short grain brown rice as well. It might take a little longer, it will take a little longer to cook unless you can soak the brown rice overnight or pre-cook it. Cook it till it's almost tender and then add it to the risotto, and that will speed up the cooking process. So brown rice, a nice short grain brown rice works just fine. You could also use farro, which is an ancient form of wheat. This is a cracked farro. It's the whole grain that's just been broken up into pieces, but you can use the whole grain farro as well. Again, like the brown rice, if you use the whole grain farro, cook it ahead of time or just soak it overnight, and that'll speed up the cooking process as well. Oats. Oats make a great risotto as well. And you can use whole grain oats, or what are also called oat groats. It's not the best name, but they're called oat groats. It's a whole grain oat. And again, just soak it or pre-cook it ahead of time. Or you could even use steel cut oats in your risotto. And that is just the whole oats that have been chopped up into smaller pieces. So lots and lots of options. Quinoa, you could use quinoa in your risotto, or even buckwheat, which is not a common grain in our diets. We usually use it for waffles and pancakes. But this is what whole grain buckwheat looks like, and again, it works really well for risotto. So lots and lots of options. So it looks like the mushrooms are starting to brown, and you can hear it too. When these get really nice and brown, they get kind of squeaky. And they don't all have to be brown. It's nice to have a variety of textures and flavors in the dish. So just another minute, they'll be ready. You'll be ready to go forward here. So the next step for risotto, after you saute your shallots, your onions, your garlic, or all three, some vegetables, is to add some white wine, and to add the grain that you're using as well. So alcohol or wine, either red wine or white wine, you can use in a risotto, really brings out the flavors, really interesting and wonderful savory flavors in the dish. Plus it adds a little flavor on its own. So I always put white wine in my risotto, but you can skip it if for some reason you want to. You don't absolutely need it. And then a scoop of whole grains, either a third or a half a cup of whatever whole grain you're using. And again, this is pearl barley. So throw that in your dish and saute the grain a little bit. That will coat it with the oil and help it pick up a little bit of the flavor. And then add the wine. And the wine actually starts to make a little bit of a sauce in the risotto. So, and just let that simmer until the wine is almost all absorbed and the pan is almost dry. And then you'll be ready to add the next step, which is the broth. So for risotto, traditionally, you saute up your vegetables and your grains, and then you start to add the broth, bit by bit, about a cup at a time or a ladle at a time, stirring between each addition, and then you cook it until the pan is almost dry before you add some more broth. So that way of cooking risotto slowly cooks the grains and draws some of the starch out of the grain, and that makes the sauce, the creamy sauce that's usually in a traditional risotto. So you can do the same thing with any other kind of grain. The barley works really well with that method, but you could also, if you're short on time, you can actually add all of the broth all at once. But just keep an eye on it and come back and stir it occasionally, because what will happen is the barley and the mushrooms and the onions that are on the bottom will burn if you don't stir it up. So a couple ways to cook it. You can also take this risotto, once you add the broth to it, you can stick it in the oven. Just cover up the pan and bake it. And that way you don't have to keep an eye on it so much. So the wine's pretty much absorbed here. So I'm going to add a scoopful of broth. And this could be homemade vegetable broth or chicken broth or just some broth that you buy in the store. And you add it about a cup at a time. Stir it up and let it simmer and cook until that broth is mostly absorbed. While that's cooking away, I think I'm going to also add some sage, some chopped up fresh sage, which will flavor this risotto really well. You could use rosemary as well. You could use thyme. That would go really nicely. It makes your kitchen smell like Thanksgiving with all these lovely flavors and aromas. So about a teaspoon or so of fresh sage. If you're using dried herbs, use about a third as much as the fresh, because they're a little more potent. It smells wonderful. And then another trick is to add even more flavor, you can add a Parmesan rind. So this is the hard edge of a wheel of Parmesan cheese. So if you look in the store and you buy wedges of Parmesan, you'll see there's always an edge that's a little crusty and hard. You don't usually eat it. You can put this in there and let it simmer with the broth and the barley, and it adds some wonderful flavor. And the last addition usually to the risotto is a little Parmesan cheese, which you can skip as well if you want to make this a vegan dish. You don't have to use any cheese at all, and it's really delicious that way. And then I usually top it with some parsley. So this is what the dish looks like when it's ready to go. And it got a little warm here. There it is. So beautiful, huh? So there's this lovely, lovely flavor. There's mushrooms, there's shallots, there's parsley, there's sage. You can throw a little parsley on top of there, a little Parmesan cheese, mix it up. And this could be a whole meal right here with some vegetables on the side, or it could be a side dish. There's lots of ways to include barleys in your meals. So I hope you try this soon. There are so many ways to enjoy this nutritious grain. You can try this risotto. You could throw some barley into some homemade soup, or try a barley salad. And barley is really great served cold because unlike other grains, it maintains a chewy, moist texture when it's chilled. And you can also substitute rolled barley for rolled oats in the morning. And it's a great way to start your day. And if you have diabetes, you'll likely get a better blood sugar after breakfast and throughout the day. So for more healthy meal ideas, recipes, and lots of videos, please visit us at yrmchealthconnect.org. You can also follow me on Facebook at YRMC's Your Healthy Kitchen, where I share what I'm making in my own kitchen, plus information on community food and garden-related events, and other fun and fascinating links to food and healthy living. So until next time, try this delicious risotto, and we'll see you soon.